Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Fall harvest is a busy time for farmers in the Midwest. Fortunately, Market Journal is available on demand through its mobile app for smartphones and tablet devices. From our weekly marketing interviews to Al's weather forecast, the Market Journal mobile app includes all of your favorite segments from the current week, as well as from past episodes. The app features tools to assist farmers and ranchers in developing their ag strategies, such as the end-of-day markets and updated weather information. The free Market Journal mobile app is available through the iTunes Store for iPhones and iPads and through the Google Play Store for Android devices. Visit the Market Journal website to learn more.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Jeff Peterson analyzes the latest USDA grain stocks report and what it means for farmers harvesting corn and soybeans. Galen Erickson talks about the decision of some cattle processors to no longer accept cows fed with Zilmax. Rick Rasby discusses grazing corn stalks after harvest. And we look at how Nebraska contributes to renewable fuel production. Just in the nick of time, the USDA on Monday released its latest grain stocks report. It found old crop corn stocks stored in all positions at 824 million bushels and soybean stocks in all positions at 141 million bushels. Both were down 17% from September 1st, 2012. Thursday morning, we talked with Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners for his thoughts on corn and soybean markets going into next week's possible October crop report and for his reaction to the latest grain stocks numbers.
We were a little surprised on the corn number. We thought that stocks number is higher than expected. The bean number, we were actually probably looking for maybe a little bit smaller number there, but we were surprised by how the market reacted to the report. We didn't think we should have seen beans pull back almost 40 cents and corn 15 based on the numbers, but I think that just tells us how nervous the market is.
Next week, there's supposed to be a crop progress report, obviously, on Monday, but the big report would be Friday's October crop report. Now, if nothing changes in Washington from the time of this taping, the government offices won't be open, so they won't be able to release that report. How do you think that could change things for those in grain trading?
Yeah, I think what it does, it probably consolidates our trade some. Right now, we've got the funds very long in soybeans. We've got them very short in corn. I think they want to probably trim those positions back a little bit. But I think what that does just narrows up our trading ranges. It doesn't give anybody confidence to put on new positions.
What if it does come out Friday, or if it gets pushed back maybe? What do you think we'll see? Do you think we'll see an adjustment in acreage at all?
I do. I think we'll see an adjustment. We're thinking corn acres could come down about 1.2 million acres. We think soybeans could come down about 300,000. And what everybody's looking at is that there was FSA numbers that were released that everybody's looking for NAS to build into their numbers. So I think that's what everybody's looking for.
What do you expect out of this crop? We'll start to see some of those numbers as well. Do you expect that there's going to be solid numbers for yield in corn and soybeans?
It sure looks like it. The numbers we're hearing so far are definitely showing that above expectation yields. As a matter of fact, we've raised our yield up to about a 156. Right now, NASA's and USDA's at a 155.3. We're still at a 40.9 right now in the soybean yield, and USDA's at a 41.2, but we have raised our yield on soybeans a half bushel also.
Any possibility after that fallback that you've started to see harvest lows, or where do you think they might come?
You know, I would love to be able to sit here, Jeff, and tell you that the harvest lows are in, but I don't think they are. Unless we get a surprise in acres or a surprise in the yield, I don't think we've seen our lows yet. As we've been doing our research, take first soybeans, I think there's an outside chance that we could see $12 on the future side, and then the corn, it's very possible to go down to 4 1/4. Now, having said that, if all of a sudden when we see the numbers from USDA, they come out and dramatically change their acres, then we'll have to reevaluate. But that's what we're looking at right now.
What about 2013 and 2014? And this is where it gets interesting because South America is supposed to produce that huge crop of beans. Obviously, the U.S. is producing a record crop of corn. So if you're looking forward to 2014 to try and make some sales, what are the things that you want to keep in mind and maybe the prices that you want to shoot for?
Yeah, I think what you really have to focus on, you got to start with your break-even numbers. This is going to be the type of year, from what we're seeing, is as you look at the 2014 crop, you're probably not going to get a chance to sell the number you want to sell. And so what that means is that you get these corn for 2014 in the upper 4s, above 475. I think you need to look to be a seller of that on some of your new crop corn. Over on the bean side, you know, if you've got beans on any bounce in here, I would be looking to sell some additional soybeans out there in the 14 also.
And do you know when that might come or how greedy you might be?
Yeah, I think right now, and we're evaluating that very close, if we get a little bounce here, we're actually looking at maybe selling some more beans on the new crop side for the 14 crop. On the corn side, we're looking at that too, just because we believe that it's going to be hard to get a big enough bounce, I believe, after harvest.
How strong is basis or the basis numbers around kind of this eastern Nebraska area?
Yeah, basis has been really good. I mean, we're at a point right now when the really good basis levels, you know, they're kind of coming in and converging with our spot harvest basis, but the number is still definitely a lot stronger than normal.
What would that indicate?
Indicates that there's very strong demand. We know that the crop is late. We know that the farmers sold a very small amount. Some of the grain buyers out there are telling us 20% of normal's been sold.
On both corn and beans?
On both corn and beans. And as these bushels are coming in, what a lot of them are saying is, you know what, we're not seeing as many sales as what we thought we'd see across the scale. I think everybody's looking for higher prices, and that concerns me a little bit because unless we see a surprise come in from the supply side, I don't think we can see enough additional demand to bounce these markets back higher as much as some people think.
Next week, we'll look at cattle markets with Mike Briggs. Again, it should be noted the October crop report is scheduled for release Friday, October 11th. In August, Tyson Foods, a company that says it produces about 1 out of every 5 pounds of meat in the U.S., announced it would no longer accept cattle that had been fed with the feed additive Zilmax. The processor said it was concerned about cases in which animals had difficulty walking. Merck, the company producing Zilmax, has suspended sales and is studying whether or not there's a connection. Zilmax is a beta-agonist that can help add weight to cattle before slaughter. Not feeding it would lower average slaughter weights and could have an impact on beef supply. We talked with Galen Erickson this week in the RB Warren Arena here on East Campus about this new beta-agonist concern in the cattle industry.
Beta-agonists are a feed supplement, a feed additive that's been approved by FDA to be used and fed to beef cattle, particularly at the end of the feeding period. And so there's very strict regulations on how they're fed, the amount that goes into the cattle, how much is mixed in the diet, and how long you can feed it. And even in the case of Zilmax, which is Zilpaterol, there's even a small withdrawal period.
Reiterate why people would want to feed it. How much weight can it add?
Well, there's really two beta-agonists that have been FDA approved. One called Optiflex, which is ractopamine, increases carcass weights 12 to 20 pounds depending upon the dosage that you give. And then the other one, feeding Zilmax, the response that we see is generally about 30 or more pounds of carcass weight when it's fed for the last 20 days in a 3-day withdrawal. And so both products are very effective in increasing carcass weight.
In August, Tyson was the first to announce that it wouldn't accept cattle that had been fed Zilmax, and Cargill followed suit after that. What was their issue with it? Why did they have concerns about it?
Well, there were some in the industry who were speculating that we're seeing increased lameness and maybe even death loss when cattle are fed Zilmax. And I think that we've been looking at the data to really determine whether that's an issue or not. But Merck Animal Health suspended sales voluntarily because they wanted to get to the bottom of this. So it was mostly from an animal welfare perspective on people seeing some challenges and then speculating that it was caused by feeding Zilmax.
What about in the research, and specifically here at UNL? I know you've fed this before. Have you noticed anything out of the ordinary?
Yeah, no, we've studied this and looked at responses so that we could, work with producers on what they could expect. And so we've done it to thousands of different head of cattle, and we've never seen any challenges with death loss, environmental stress, or with lameness at the feedlot. And those cattle also did not have any challenges at the packing plants on the day of marketing. So I've been curious on where this is going and making sure we are sure there's a cause and effect here, because use of things like these feed supplements that really help us produce more beef sustainably, I think is a direction we need to go in the future as an industry. So we got to be sure that there's no animal welfare concerns, but if there's not, then move on and certainly figure out what is the cause of some of these challenges that we're seeing and make sure we've adopted management that solves it.
Yeah, that sort of answers the next question. As you mentioned, Merck suspended sales, but what's next for the industry and what's next for specifically cattle producers?
Well, I would say we're in the process right now of reviewing data, and there is a tremendous amount of data available on does this cause any challenges or not. I have to comment that it doesn't appear to be any challenges due to feeding Zilmax, at least based on controlled studies where we have cattle not fed it and cattle that are. So that data review is occurring right now, and then there'll be some best management practices that are developed as a result of this that hopefully make our industry better, and then we'll get to the bottom of what is causing some of the welfare issues that we may be seeing. I would just comment, I don't even know if we know what the incidence is, and so we've got to get to the bottom of this and make sure what we're doing is sustainable and, importantly, not causing any challenges from an animal welfare standpoint.
As this issue seems to be a fluid one, we'll update you as more news arises. In Nebraska and several neighboring states, yellow spring peas were grown on about 25,000 acres this year and contracted with State Line Producers Cooperative in Gering. In the October Nebraska Farmer, you can read about this emerging high-protein food crop and how it performed in 2013. Blake Johnson of Holdridge, who's shown on the October Nebraska Farmer cover, contracted to grow 900 acres of dry land yellow spring peas this summer. Johnson says the peas should fit well in his dry land rotation and even in areas where pumping allocations may limit irrigation. You can read more about yellow spring peas and how they'll be marketed in the October Nebraska Farmer. Nebraska farmers have harvested 9% of this year's corn crop, 7 points behind the 5-year average and 42 points behind this time a year ago. But those open cornfields may now provide another feed source for the state's cattle. As such, we asked Rick Rasby this week what producers might want to keep in mind as they turn their cows out on stalks.
Corn residue really is a very good feed resource for beef cows. Weaning's not that far away for most cow-calf operations. In fact, a lot of cows in Nebraska or calves in Nebraska are weaned in October and November. These residues provide an excellent feed resource, especially for cows after weaning. Cows can actually increase weight and body condition by grazing residue. They are selective grazers. They'll graze or select the corn if there's any corn left in the field, followed by the husk and the leaf, and finally the cob and the stalk. And really anymore there's not a lot of corn left in the field, and so husk and leaf are the primary components that the cows will select. If you take a look at our corn stalk grazing calculator, we actually determine stalking rate or the number of cows per acre based on the yield. And so based on yield, that will determine the amount of residue that's left in the field. And we can also calculate based on yield the amount of husk and leaf that's left in the field. And so we'll actually calculate, at least for our recommendations, for cows to graze stalk fields, but the target component will be the husk and the leaf. The cows really can do quite well without a lot of supplementation. In fact, our data would suggest that cows in good body condition going out on corn stalks actually don't need any protein supplementation. In fact, about all they need is salt and minerals. If those cows are a little bit thin going out on corn stalks, it might be worth the chips to maybe add a little bit of protein supplement into that supplementation program. As you think about grazing stock residues, what I'd have you do is just to make sure that there's not a lot of down corn. I think the harvest conditions this year look really good, and so I wouldn't expect a lot of down corn. I'd have you check the ends of the fields in case you turned a little bit sharp or the hopper was a little bit full and you spilled some corn on the ends of those rows. Make sure that those areas are cleaned up, because cattle that are really or have grazed corn residue in the past, they know how to find corn, and if they find it at the end of the field and in those piles, it probably needs to be cleaned up so that you can basically get away from any kind of problems with the cows.
For crop producers who may not have utilized cornstalk grazing or baling in the past, we'd invite you to view our interview with Terry Kloppenstein during last year's September 7th episode. Terry explains research showing how removing some residue can actually lead to a subsequent yield boost. We'll feature that video along with our other individual segments from this week's show on our website. We'll also link to the UNL CalQ later if you're interested in using that tool. If you drive through Nebraska on I-80, there's a good chance you're doing so with the help of one of the state's renewable fuels. Texas has wind power, the Southwest has solar energy, and Nebraska plays a large role in contributing to ethanol and biodiesel. Both fuels have proven a benefit not only to those in agriculture, but also for drivers and residents across the country. And thanks to the Renewable Fuel Standard, ethanol and biodiesel are also providing added value to crops in the state.
In the Midwest, fall harvest is underway. Farmers in Nebraska are combining the state's two major crops. More than 1/3 of this corn will eventually be sold for ethanol. 1/4 of the soybean oil derived from beans in the U.S. will be used to make biodiesel. Nebraska contributes to two major renewable fuel sources, and the state's farmers are on the front end of production. In the southwestern United States, there's solar power. Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico carry the most potential. Texas leads the nation in wind energy. While Nebraska has high potential in wind, it's struggled to gain a major market share.
Wind power in the state of Nebraska has really been slowed by three things: geography, policy, and economics in particular.
UNL Extension educator in energy John Hayes says Nebraska has relatively low energy rates. It also has a public power system. Hayes says those non-tax-paying public entities have been unable to take full advantage of the tax credit subsidies available in wind. And most cities who could use the energy from wind can find it cheaper than pulling it from turbines in Nebraska. Most of Nebraska's electricity comes from coal, almost 70% actually. Only 3% of the state's generation comes from renewable sources like water and wind. Behind China, the U.S. is the second largest emitter of carbon dioxide on Earth. Together, burning coal, natural gas, and oil is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions around the world.
One program could continue to help lower those emissions. Originally created in 2005, the Renewable Fuel Standard, or RFS, requires a certain amount of renewables to be blended into fuels like gasoline or diesel. For farmers picking these fields, it helps open up a huge marketplace for their corn or soybeans.
The Renewable Fuel Standard really set a market for renewable fuels in the United States, and in particular, the impact on Nebraska, it set a demand for ethanol fuels to be blended into gasoline.
Ethanol, produced from crops such as corn, currently accounts for about 10% of gasoline used in the U.S. The RFS mandate requires 13.8 billion gallons of ethanol be blended into gasoline for 2013. But its benefits are wide-ranging. According to the Nebraska Corn Board, in 2011, ethanol reduced gas prices by $1.09 per gallon. It also lessens environmental impact by lowering greenhouse gas emissions by up to 59% compared to regular gasoline. Here in Nebraska, the second largest ethanol maker in the country, co-products made in ethanol production, like distillers' grains, have found a welcoming home in feeding sectors for livestock. Nebraska can still ship corn and livestock to other states or countries, but now it can also break down grain in-state, which can then be used in other products. Todd Sneller of the Nebraska Ethanol Board says ethanol epitomizes value-added production.
This has then started to attract allied industries, and we see engineering firms and transportation companies and enzyme manufacturers start to add additional capital and additional jobs and additional infrastructure. And I think it's been that multiplier factor in the economy that's been very apparent since ethanol came to town.
Of the ethanol produced by Nebraska's 25 plants, the volume that moves out of state does so mostly to California or the Pacific Northwest. It's coming from typically smaller-sized communities in the state. Over 1,500 people are employed in rural Nebraska because of renewable fuels.
I think that's perhaps one of the biggest values, is not only recognizing that it creates jobs, but where are those jobs occurring and what sort of compensation rates are occurring at these plants. And I think that's one of the things that most of the ethanol sector has been proud of, is that they create quality jobs in some of our smallest communities.
Nebraska doesn't currently produce biodiesel commercially. Plants in Arlington and Scribner had a combined production capacity of more than 5 million gallons in both 2008 and 2009. High-priced feedstocks initially proved difficult for biodiesel, but the RFS, technically now the RFS2, is helping to turn profitability.
Biodiesel made an amazing comeback 2011, and it did so partially because of the Renewable Fuel Standard. The Renewable Fuel Standard said that the renewable diesel would be blended into fuel. Not only did it say that, but biodiesel qualifies as an advanced biofuel. And so between those two items, the biodiesel demand went from about 500 million gallons to over 1 billion gallons in 2011 alone.
A recent United Soybean Board study shows biodiesel contributed to a $15 billion increase in soybean oil revenues from 2006 to 2012. That raised the price of soybeans by 74 cents per bushel. Because it's an advanced biofuel, meaning its greenhouse gas emission is 60% less than gasoline, biodiesel falls into a different RFS requirement than ethanol. The current year requirement for biomass-based diesel is 1.28 billion gallons. The industry produced around 1.1 billion gallons in each of the last 2 years. And it's not just used as a transportation fuel. The East Coast has embraced biodiesel by blending it with home heating oil to make bioheat. Talking with us at Husker Harvest Days, Greg Anderson of the National Biodiesel Board emphasized how large that market is for biodiesel.
The northeastern states use about 7 billion gallons of heating oil each year. New York City is just 1 billion gallons of that, so it's huge. It's become actually the biggest biodiesel user in the country, New York City, because they mandated a 2% blend, and actually they're using closer to 5 right now. And we're going to see that ratchet up in the years ahead, where more and more biodiesel will be incorporated into their home heating.
Extended drought during the 2012 growing season challenged blenders of both ethanol and biodiesel. Corn and soybean crops were decimated by little rain and high heat. 2013 should provide cheaper feedstocks. U.S. farmers are expected to produce a record corn crop, and soybean harvest is forecasted to be the 4th largest on record. Wind energy and solar power may eventually gain ground in this state, but for the time being, Nebraska's contribution to the renewable energy markets originates in the fields of rural Nebraska.
Part of the RFS program allows the EPA to change mandated volumes based on the year and availability of inputs. That issue took center stage a year ago when, after extended drought, several governors urged the EPA to waive the ethanol mandate in order to provide cheaper feed for livestock. The EPA denied the governor's request, saying the requirements for a waiver hadn't been met, and even if they had, it wouldn't make much difference. Next week, we'll take a look at a recent UNL study that shows how Renewable Identification Number credits, or RINs, actually acted similar to a waiver by allowing ethanol blenders to use less corn. We'll also talk about the level of waiver that would have been necessary last year to fully offset drought effects. The threat of snow appeared in the western half of Nebraska as we approach the middle of this week. Now here's UNL Extension state climatologist Al Dutcher to forecast what else might be in store for the next 7 days.
Well, here we are again for the weekly forecast. Last week we talked about the potential of some colder weather arriving late in the week, along with a chance of precipitation. Actually, the system that has been impacting us the last couple of days came in about 24 hours earlier than what the models were suggesting last week, and we've seen some very impressive rainfall totals across portions of central Nebraska and up through north central Nebraska, anywhere from 2 to 6 inches in the Hastings area. And then we had some areas that approached up to 8 inches near the Walbach, and across the eastern Nebraska, totals varied in the 1 to 2 inch range on the Wednesday storm. And then we had some follow-up moisture. But more impressively, we've seen the cold air start to move into the Panhandle, and a big first season snowstorm for the Front Range of the Rockies, particularly Wyoming and up through Montana. And some of that carried over in, of course, to the northwestern Panhandle, where the snow was still flying this morning, and it should have come to an end here this afternoon. But we might see in some of those areas anywhere from 8 inches, possibly even 12 inches, coupled with some high winds. So our first taste of winter, unfortunately, there's probably more of them coming down the road, but we need the moisture, so we welcome that. And we hope that as we go through this winter, we'll see continuation of that trend to rebuild the snowpack, so that eventually will result in some much improved reservoir situations in western Nebraska. Let's take a look at the upper air models and see how this week is going to progress. And as we go to the upper air models, the first thing I'll draw your attention to is here's that upper air system that was impacting us for through the Wednesday through yesterday's time frame that's now slipping up to the western Great Lakes, and we'll start to see conditions starting to ease as we go to the afternoon hours, precipitation coming in across north central and northwestern Nebraska. And as the system moves out, we'll start to see clearing conditions. Today looks to be the coldest in this week, with pretty much typical 40-degree weather out in the northwestern panhandle to possibly low 50s as you get across southern Nebraska. And then by tomorrow, the system lifts to the Great Lakes. We start to see this ridge build in, and it looks like a fairly good stretch of dry weather, although we'll start out cool and gradually warm. We'll see temperatures improve by 10 to 15 degrees on Sunday. As we get into Monday, of course, the ridge starts to build in, and we start to see some very nice conditions and drying weather, and more as we get into Tuesdays. We'll get under the core of the warmth. We could be looking at a good widespread 70s across the state with possibly some low 80s across southern Nebraska. Now on Wednesday, we're going to start to see a trough coming into the Pacific Northwest, and another piece of system coming up from the Baja Peninsula. All of those will start to merge into the Central Plains as we get into later in the week. So by the time we get to Thursday, the system takes shape, and we start to see an increase in precipitation chances, particularly Thursday night across the Panhandle. On Friday, they start to move out into the state. The best probability of precipitation will be across western Nebraska, most of it moving into eastern Nebraska on Saturday. The temperatures look to be very cool this weekend, warming as we go to the late part of the next week. And then we'll see a cool down on Friday. 8 to 14 day forecast says below normal temperatures as that new trough comes in terms of precipitation. Another round of precipitation for us. Now, if we look at the 30-day forecast for October, keeps the warmth to the east in terms of precipitation, below normal precipitation. But I will remind you that this latest storm system, pretty much for the eastern half of the state, we've already hit our monthly precipitation total for October.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews with Jeff Peterson, Galen Erickson, Rick Rasby, and our feature on renewable fuels in Nebraska are available individually on the Market Journal website and through our mobile app as part of the October 4th episode. Next week, Mike Briggs will be our cattle market analyst, and we'll look at a UNL study detailing the effect of ethanol production during drought on grain prices. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.